MultimediaJay Radio Style. This is MultimediaJay Radio Style, a podcasty thing chock full of opinions. Hope you can handle it. And now, the man himself, MultimediaJay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am certifiably nuts. Some of you, quote-unquote, already knew that. But happy Saturday morning, everybody, or at least that's when I'm recording this. We are in the middle of a heat wave here in New England. There is going to be no decent weather for the next several days. Hazy, hot, and humid, but then again, it's mid-July. Would you expect any less? So don't be surprised if I take it easy or experiment with hack job air conditioning or anything of that sort, because the dew point has been at tropical levels for the last 24 hours at the very least. We're supposed to lose the humidity this weekend, but I don't think that'll happen until it's 90 degrees at lunchtime when some of this water vapor can burn off again. Regardless, before I start sweating bullets, how about we talk about some of the news from this week, like the brand new Nintendo that's coming out. Yes, at one point in my life, brand new Nintendo meant that you got another NES. That happened to me exactly once on a lovely Christmas morning. I can't remember if I had my Super Nintendo yet or not, but basically, I played that thing to death. My original NES fell off the shelf a couple of times. Some of the plastic chipped off in the corners. The 72-pin connector we know had issues with that original console. It was shot, it squeaked, you had to blow in the cartridge about 6 different ways to get everything working, although nowadays we know that wasn't really the right thing to do. You get older, you get wiser, and you get consoles that effing work on the first try. Yes. There once was a time in my life when a brand new Nintendo meant something. I never thought I would hear this again all these years later, and what do you know? Here we are. The NES Classic Edition has been announced. It's going to be a brand new Nintendo. Basically, it's a nostalgia box of the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's going to be small, compact. It's not going to take the original cartridges. Boo. And it's going to go on sale towards the end of this year around the holiday season, so I imagine it will be selling out all over the place as grown-up Nintendo kids like myself either buy them because they want them or buy them to gouge people with them on eBay. I heard about scalping, price scalping, but I think that's a little too, well, crude of a term, but I think price gouging will keep things a little more professional. Sorry, the coffee hasn't kicked in yet. But there's no other time of the day when I can really record these things without rotisserieing myself in my own house. Or having Jethro boom bike all through the neighborhood on those hog bikes that make a lot of noise while they're going 20 miles an hour. Ooh, such power. I should probably mention that today's discussion is a big exception. I don't like talking about Nintendo or Sega very much anymore because of their screwball approaches towards social media and the dumb things they've done over the last couple of years. But in this case, I'm going to make a big exception by simply talking about nostalgia boxes in general. The NES Classic Edition, although I do like from the FAQ, do you have to blow on it to get it to work? Well, you know, some things are best left in the 80s. Anyways, the NES Classic Edition is a nostalgia box. It's in the same category as the Atari Flashback and the AtGames Genesis. And just like those other two devices, Nintendo, again, they're not really known for new ideas, except maybe Splatoon, but Nintendo is known for running old ideas completely and totally into the ground. Like friend codes. Glad those didn't come back for the Wii U. Well, anyways, the biggest old idea that they are totally making dance around a fire right now is their approach towards YouTube and social media and the screw bucket decisions they've made that are totally not of this millennium. But yeah, that's another discussion entirely. I really don't like these nostalgia boxes. I really don't. It's probably because I'm not the target market for them. I'm more than willing to have an emulation set up through something like the Virtual Console and not actually need another gray box Nintendo to feel like I'm getting a retro experience. Heck, I'm smart enough to know that really what matters is the controller. So if you can find a way to make the original controllers work with an emulation setup like the Virtual Console, you're set. I mean, unless you're going to be constantly gawking at the gray box by the TV. Heck, we're not even playing NES on the same TVs we used to back in the day. You got to turn on scan lines as an emulation feature in order to get that kind of an experience. So, to an extent, the so-called retro experience that is out there these days just isn't so. However, I would be remiss to not mention why I'm not a fan of these nostalgia boxes. The target market for these nostalgia boxes is basically people who weren't around for these consoles as heydays and don't have anything from these consoles as heydays that just want a little taste. And the NES Classic Edition, again, waiting for the coffee to kick in, the NES Classic Edition fits right into that mold and then some. The original Atari Flashback I considered a disappointment because if you had some Atari games, you couldn't play them on it, even though it was, well, a new Atari. Some modders found out that there were still contacts and pins on the board in the original Atari Flashback that could be used for a cartridge connector, and found ways to retrofit cartridge connectors to the original device. Later devices eliminated that. Over on the Sega side of things, the developers of the AT-Games Genesis at least had the foresight to put a cartridge slot on it, but the goofball holdback feature on that device is that the sound doesn't output in stereo from what I've read, which, of course, stereo sound was one of the things that Genesis did that Nintendo didn't. Actually, I remember playing the original Sonic on a Model 1 Genesis through the headphone jack with a pair of headphones, and I was absolutely awed at the stereo sound coming from a gaming console. Actually, all the TVs I had when I was little they were all mono, had a little speaker in the lower right, and that was it. So stereo itself, when not listening to music, was a new experience for me at the time. Either way, in true run old ideas into the ground fashion, Nintendo's not breaking any new ground here. The NES Classic Edition will have its holdback features. The cartridge slot isn't going to open, and it's not going to have external media, and it's not going to hook up to the internet. It is purely a nostalgia box. It's one of those cutesy little things that someone's well-meaning but ill-informed grandparents might get them for Christmas after a couple of price drops. I've certainly had a couple of those over the years. Granted, if you like most of the games in the list, it may be some cost savings just to get this box, but there are a lot of unanswered questions. Mostly having to do with people who own like the Retron 5 or something and seeing what that brought to the table. What's this going to allow in terms of like scan lines and graphics engines and scaling everything and all that lovely stuff? Or is it just going to be a basic emulator box? We know it's an appliance because nothing can really get hooked up to it. You just turn it on. And that's what the issue is. Yeah, you'll save money buying all these games on this box if you like most of them and don't have them yet, which I already have a few of them on the Virtual Console and Nintendo eShop. But anyways, the big shortcoming with all of this is going to be if anything happens to this box, and it's smaller than the original NES, so it might be easier, and it's going to have wired controllers, so it's going to be easier for this thing to fall off the shelf than an original Nintendo if you had one, like I had one that hit the carpet a few times. Still worked for some strange reason afterwards. Boy, they built those things good back in those days. But this device, if anything happens to it, or it overheats, or something lets go on the memory or something like that, that's it. 30 games, gone. So I don't know what Nintendo's support is going to be on these things, but yeah, that's one of the problems with these little appliance boxes. Same thing too with save games. The Zelda and Zelda 2 have been verified as being on this system, so if anything happens to the box, there go your save games for those games. Of course, this software is so old at this point that I really don't think that this would matter much. Most of us probably have fully completed Zeldas on Virtual Console or elsewhere by now, maybe even an original cartridge that we've changed out the battery in once or twice. The thing is, though, the Retron 5 probably beats this because you can take the original controller, hook it up, have save states independent of whatever the state of the battery is on the cartridge, not have to worry about batteries anymore. In many ways, this does not respond to the clone hardware market that has sprung up since the hardware patents started expiring. And that's probably one of the reasons why these folks that make these things don't have them totally compatible or total replacements for the original hardware, because that might be an issue right there. Now, I may, and that's a giant coin toss at this point, get one just to say I did. I was a Nintendo kid back in the day. As a gamer, I absolutely am a grown-up Nintendo kid. So it'd be fun to, just get the box. They're going to make even the box look similar. Same thing with the controller as well. So I may just get it just for fun, even if I don't seriously use it for anything. Or it'd be a fun thing to bring over the folks' place. Like, did you put a sci-fi shrink ray to your Nintendo? Yeah, well, no, they're not going to say that. My folks actually gave away all my NES stuff when I was at college. Boo! The classic consoles in my generation are like baseball cards in my dad's generation. Whatever. Yeah. So, watch the desk, darn it. Well, anyways, yeah, if I get one of these things, it's essentially going to be a bucket list thing. To say that I did, I don't know if they're gonna be easy to find if there are Nintendo fans grabbing these things all over the place, and then eBay fans buying them to flip them this holiday season. What I think the best thing is going to be that comes out of this NES Classic Edition thing, though, is the brand new NES controller. I don't know about you, but I've tried using original hardware with the Super Retro Trio and adapters for USB, and it just doesn't feel the same. Probably because it's been decades. This is something that Staffa and I should talk about on Ada Continues at some point. The denial that we as classic era, if you even want to call it that, gamers, are getting old, and that the Super Nintendo, for example, really was 20 years ago. And the regular Nintendo, as we called it back in those days, really was up to 30 years ago. Come on, man. The Super Mario Brothers celebrated its 30th anniversary. Come on. This really was that long ago. So, what does all of that passage of time do to things like plastic and rubber? Yeah, thought so. I bought an NES controller, to play Shovel Knight with a while back. I was like, this thing is stiff as all heck. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's probably 30 years old. Probably been very, very heavily used. The rubber on the contacts is probably stiffened a little. And of course, we know plastic can have chemical issues. Those of you who've had yellowing consoles, like my yellow bottom Super Nintendo, so over the years, those of you probably are already familiar with that. But I was in denial when my Super Nintendo started yellowing. I'm like, is this thing really 10 years old already? So, came home from college one day and the Super Nintendo had turned yellow on the bottom. Like, oh, shoot. Yeah. So, anyways, they didn't give that away because I hid it in my desk when I went off to school. I left the regular Nintendo in plain sight, and they kind of helped themselves to it. Fortunately, they didn't get rid of my Nintendo 64, so that at least is still original. But I've looked at the plastic on it, and it looks a little off compared to its original shade of black. So that might be yellowed plastic that's covered up by the black paint. Fact remains, these devices are getting old, whether we like it or not. And at some point, we will have only emulation as our option if we don't want to get gouged all over the place. For, you see what people are doing, especially with YouTube and what that has done to the retro games market. The thing is, though, there are modern analogs to these old controllers out there, but I find the build quality in them is often lacking. Of course, third parties and whatnot. So here's where I think the biggest potential is for this thing. The new NES Classic Edition controller. It will already work with the Virtual Console because it has the same pinout from what I'm seeing. So, at some point, some third party is probably going to make something that goes from Wii U plug to USB. And when I can use the new NES controller to play Shovel Knight on a PC with fresh plastic and fresh rubber on the contacts, that would probably be a good thing. Likewise, also, I imagine there will be people out there that will probably find, or some way, or maybe there'll be an adapter for this too, to go from NES Classic back to the original NES, and use new controllers with your old gray box that still works. The ultimate mod project that I can imagine from this, and I just know enthusiasts are going to try doing this, somebody out there is going to buy one of these things, strip it down, take the shell off, get rid of the circuit board and everything, and try and mount the hardware inside a broken original NES and get everything working, including the cartridges. If it's physically possible, with what's available in the system, I imagine that's probably gonna happen at some point. It'd be funny if Nintendo locked it down so that wouldn't be possible. That's exactly the sort of thing I would expect from them. But, a man can dream, can't he? Just the fun of having a gray box Nintendo that doesn't blink. Or does HDMI without having to mod the motherboard. Let's not forget, the original NES didn't even have stereo sound on the composites. But yes, this will be interesting. Also, the reason why I'm such a stickler for cartridge support is that there are games out there still floating around out there for a couple dollars that you can buy the cartridge. They're what the NES punks of the world call common titles. The so-called common titles, if you're rebuilding a collection from back in the day that you no longer have and you want to have again, some of these games are not winding up on the Virtual Console. So roughly the same price, common title, like $5, $10 or something like that. You can pick it up and play it on something, except right now that something is the Retron 5, with the runner-up being the Super Retro Trio, which actually is, which doesn't use an Android emulator or anything, it just runs things directly. But I think it's a dying breed. I think the Retron 5 was a standard setter. And that, of course, is what I am sure people will be comparing this NES Classic Edition to. So I'm on the fence about getting one. I'm either going to get one of these things to cross it off my bucket list, or I'm going to get the controller and try and find some way to get that to work with Virtual Console or PC or something. But I think, with how much I played the original gray box Nintendo when I was little, that I'm probably going to end up getting one of these things just to say I did. I don't consider it a serious gaming device by any stretch of the imagination. Heck, it's practically the Nintendo answer to the Ouya, except the Ouya actually connected to the internet. The real value in this is probably going to be that the controller could go to the Wii U Virtual Console through a Wiimote, so you can get the Nintendo gamepad experience while playing original 8-bit games on a Wii U, or, hey, if Nintendo's smart, they'll make the peripherals work with the new NX. But from what I understand, the NX isn't supposed to replace the Wii U. We'll see about that, Nintendo. Anyways, back to the actual topic of this discussion, and it's these nostalgia boxes. These nostalgia boxes don't replace actually looking for something that'll play the original hardware, because there are games out there that were released on cartridges that will probably never be released on emulation, or if they do, they will be released. Well, this assumes by emulation I mean Virtual Console. Of course, there have been other gray area emulators for decades at this point, but we owe it to those gray area emulators for things like the Virtual Console being a thing in the first place. This is what caught the eye of the hardware vendors, like, yeah, I guess people really like this stuff even though these games are 20 years old. Let's find a way to make money off of this instead of being all mad about it. And voila, what do you know? Just about every console out there these days has at least that much in common with Steam in terms of playing games downloaded from the internet. So, but for reasons, like licensing agreements that expired and things like that, sometimes the official emulation experience through something like a Virtual Console it's not going to be doable anymore. Like the Mike Tyson's Punch-Out instead of the Mr. Dream Punch-Out. That's just something that came and went. So you would have to find an original cartridge to play that. And that's why this thing is absolutely no threat whatsoever to the Retron market. People with clone consoles and Famiclones and the whole 9 yards have absolutely nothing to fear from this thing. Or any of these things for that matter. Because it seems like the industry just can't make these things without putting some stupid little gotcha in there. The Atari Flashback couldn't play original cartridges unless modded, and that was eventually revised out. The At Games Genesis had the sound issues, and now this thing, the NES Classic, is essentially going to be an appliance, a nostalgia appliance. The controller will probably bring more longer-lasting value than the box will. I imagine many of these people will just end up with the box as a nostalgia piece. Heck, someone's probably going to buy one of these things and then never open it and hope it's worth money in 30 years. Look, never opened, factory sealed, give me $500. Yeah. This is the sort of stuff that we were not thinking about when we were watching Captain N or the Mario Brothers Super Show with Captain Lou Albano as Mario, getting sugar rushed off the sugary breakfast cereal and having all kinds of paraphernalia, stickers, posters, the whole 9 yards. Shoot, I thought it was a big thing when Dick Entertainment put Mario Super Show on the internet for the first time, on some kind of children's entertainment something or another. Heck, this show's on Netflix last time I checked. Well, maybe it isn't anymore, but maybe I'll go digging for it. Maybe this is the weekend for nostalgia with this ratty summer weather we're having. So yeah, nostalgia boxes, they have their target market. Folks like me probably aren't it. make your own decisions and judgment calls on these things. I am going to turn the fans back on. Thank you very much. Maybe some AC too. Till next time, this is Multimedia Jay signing off. Thanks for stopping by.